You'd be surprised how many people that are really unfamiliar with the subject know the talking points to repeat. They won't even know the radius of the Earth, but they will know what debunks flat Earth. I've talked to many PhDs off the record. None of them will agree to talk on the record. There's just too much to lose for them.
There's a lot of folks who go in believing in the conventional programming and then find themselves unable to disprove the flat Earth assumptions.
They had to come up with a way to keep the Earth moving through space. The first thing they had to do was get rid of the ether. We're swimming in an ocean of potential. All the energy comes from there. And so why would you not be able to tap into it? Then they rolled out Einstein and he just warped the mind of people.
Hi, and welcome back to Reclamation Radio. I am Dr. Kelly Brogan, and today's guest is Austin Witsit. We will be discussing the nature of this realm, what it is, what it's not, how he talks to people at a cocktail party about what it is that he does, which is provide an extraordinary library of evidence about the nature of this stationary plane that we are living on, and has put extraordinary energy into debating and debunking, which is something that most of us, and my colleagues are not spending our time doing. So we're really grateful that somebody's out there doing it for sport. And we also talk about the unseen realm and why that matters, the significance of what comes back into the picture when you no longer believe in the classical solar system and the spinning ball model of this so-called planet. So a lot in here, but mostly just casual chat with a very cool guy who is an extraordinary ambassador of this information. Enjoy. Welcome, Austin, to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So I have teenage daughters, as many of the folks listening know. And as a career activist and know-it-all truther for, many, many years, I have come to recognize many of the shadows of this approach, especially as a mother, as a parent. And I've come to see the sort of worldview that many of us in the truthing game are putting on stage on offer, right? And I see it now through the lens, through their lens. So I see it through the lens of a cool teenager. And I have struggled to see the appeal in a lot of what we are peddling as truthers, right? So there was that fateful day when one of my daughters said to me a couple of years ago, "Mama, you're afraid of so many things," right? And here I am experiencing myself as this Joan of Arc, ending cycles of abuse in my mother line and all the things. And she's feeling the fear, right, of all of the food and the contaminants and the EMFs and the overlords and whatever. And that was an invitation for me to begin to recognize the energetic signature, literally, what it energetically feels like to believe certain things and to need other people to see certain things, right? So now when I come across somebody who is speaking truth to power, a lot of what I pay attention to is the vibe, right? And do I, would my kids find this compelling, right? Or is this just sort of they'd rather stay in Normie land because that's where, the fun is or whatever. And so when I first came across your work, shortly thereafter, we met briefly at a Flat Earth conference. Right. I know the true Earth phraseology is preferred, and I also prefer it. And that's basically what it was. Right. And it was not exactly the sexiest event. Right. So the luxury diva in me was oh my God, what is this hotel and setting and all the deficiencies I was really focused on. And when we met, I was yes, this is a pattern disrupt. This guy is a pattern disrupt because you're this handsome, tall guy in your pink tracksuit that you're completely pulling off. And I thought, this is somebody that my kids would look at and be oh, he's a vibe. He's has something to say. And this is not even to tap into the absolute like wealth of the reservoir of brilliance that you bring to bear. There's something in the like you're being an ambassador for this so-called movement that I think is really important. And I'm sure that so many people will feel in your system like a level of regulation, a level of self-possession, and that will sense that you have like your tentacles out in many different arenas to feel and attune to like what's actually going on out there. And I think that's part of why you do a lot of debates, right? Because most of us, we were just talking offline about this, like I don't bother with debates. Most people, they do one and then like, I'm never doing that again. But my sense is like, it helps you to feel like into what's going on out there, right? Like you get to like have your little like sensors activated, and it may be a part of the magic of why you, as they would say, like leave no crumbs. Like you go, into the arena and, all of us are just like, it reminds me of like in high school when you like push the person into the dance circle, you're like, like everyone all of our colleagues are always like pushing you into the dance circle because we know that you're going to eat it up. So I am really delighted to be in conversation with you, Austin, and very excited and proud to have you representing so much of the myth busting and the intellectual rigor that is ultimately the foundation of this kind of inquiry. And I want to start out with that weird intro. I want to start out with just a bit of color, like to your story of coming on to True Earth, Flat Earth, globe busting, and how this became like your issue, right? Because there's many, right? Because there's so many related arenas of myth busting. Obviously, I came through the medical arena, and others in our collegial realm, like, came through other portals. And you've arrived at this one, and you're still chipping away at it. So what is it about this topic of cosmology that matters to you? How did you get here? And why are you still getting up every day, contributing to the good fight, would you say?
Well, thank you for that intro. Very kind words. So my flat earth story is pretty funny actually, because I just heard a rapper say it, like that's actually just what happened. I just heard a rapper B.O.B. say it, and he's got bars, and I was telling everyone, listen to, so I've always been like the conspiracy guy, I guess, but it's funny you say that, because I've always made a point of people make it so weird, like and it's just like overloading. And so I always my objective was to flip the table, whereas like, it's actually weird that you're making it weird, like I didn't put the poison in the food or whatever. Like it's weird that you're freaking out about it. So I would tell them to listen to B.O.B. because it's like, how are you going to hate on it? It's like 2 minutes. It's like objectively a bumping song or whatever. And he's actually a musician, he plays all the instruments, a bunch of different sounds. It's like a vibe. So I was telling everyone to listen to B.O.B. Then he said the earth was flat. I'm like, dude, why did you do this to me? So I had to look into it basically. Yeah, pretty much. I'm like, you just discredited all this work. So I looked into it, and, it's a rabbit hole to say the least. So that's kind of what started me down. And I just saw no pictures of Earth or whatever. So really at first, I kind of became obsessed with it. I had one of my exes, I was staying with one of my exes at the time. And so she was more like, come back and tell me what it is, So I was just obsessing with it. And I figured it out pretty quickly. Like we were lied to about the Earth. And then I just moved on. And I would talk to people in my personal life. Years later, I found out really how important it was, I think, when I discovered stuff like the ether and magnetism and electricity and energy and like how metaphysical this place really is, like how intertwined it is with metaphysics and the implications of this giant cosmos like centered around us and stuff like that. So when I realized that would glitch the whole matrix, meaning and this is answer to the other question as well as to why I still focus on it, even though at this point it's become like painfully reiterative oftentimes, because I think it is actually like the glitch where if people see this, you can't just go right back into a slumber, right? I mean, the medical industry is very similar. Like once you open that book and you see that everything is poisonous, and you see that the way they claim that they're keeping you healthy is the opposite, it's really hard to unsee it. And I think that this is maybe like the top of that. So I just think it frees people's minds in such a way where people are materialistic and nihilistic, and they don't realize how beautiful this place is. That may sound kind of cliche, but that's actually why I do it. I think it is like the glitch. So that's kind of a brief summary.
I wonder if you would agree though, because I've noticed that I have medical colleagues, right? Like health investigators and those who are into health freedom and bodily sovereignty and who have come to understand the bait and switch of pharma, who are extremely activated by this topic, right? And especially my male colleagues, for whatever reason, I have theories about that. So the medical portal of entry doesn't seem sufficient in terms of depth of inquiry to somehow by default include questioning, the little globe on the kindergarten teacher's desk, right? Kind of propaganda. Then I have a lot of colleagues and associates in the lawful reclamation world, right? And, looking into legacy birth certificate accounts and, status correction and all that world, creditor commerce. And a lot of those folks also don't get this. And some of those folks don't get the germ stuff, right? Like it doesn't translate. And when I meet somebody who's investigated cosmology, which again, I'm not a physicist. I have, a background in scientific inquiry, so I know how to think this way. However, this isn't like my arena by any stretch. But when I meet somebody who has looked into this, they already by default get the rest, right? So when you say that it's like this fulcrum, you didn't say that, but when you look at it that way, like, yes, this is the belief pivot that allows you to see more clearly. And I like to use the phrase like with sober eyes, like you just pull down the projections and you can sit in the discomfort of like not necessarily having a replacement theory and not necessarily knowing what is, but yeah, really looking at how we bought in to a whole tale that doesn't seem to be the full story. So like, what do you think it is about this subject? Like why does it represent a worldview in the way that I'm suggesting? Whereas like the true thing in these other fields doesn't necessarily confer that full transition. Like I can't tell you how many, even of my former patients in some cases, of folks who've like awakened to the nature of the body's wisdom and awakened to the limitations of the allopathic model. And yet they still seem stuck in this like victim, triangle energy. And they still seem stuck in like, hoping for the, to elect the next hero and still right with these like blinders to some extent. And there's just something different about this. It's the rabbit hole nobody ever comes out from. And it just sort of like, right, encompasses like all of these other arenas. Why do you think that is?
Yeah, that's a good question because I think it's deeper than I know, to be honest. But there are some obvious reasons, I think. So like if you figure out about medicine, even say germ theory, there's no relationship to any of the other truths. Meaning like you can find out that what we're doing to children when they're born is like evil. And then you can just go right back into thinking like politics is real. There's seemingly like no link. I know many people like that actually. But this is like actually what cosmology is an entirety of your worldview question. Like that's actually what it is. Like where you are and where you came from and where you're going and what is the purpose and how did you get here and how does it work? That's really what cosmology is. So if you break through the barrier of the assumptions of those questions, you kind of have to just reset. Now, I do think that there's maybe even something deeper to it, right? Because when you discover like ether, everything is vibration, everything's actually a modality of the ether, everything's literally interconnected. And so frequency, vibration, it's all connected. And so there may be something deeper as to the actual resonance required to see this truth and kind of where you like where you enter in this sea of vibration at that point. And that may sound woo-woo to some people, but I think there may be a metaphysical component to it. But in a simple way, it is you have to actually go to the very foundation of the lens you're going to view the world through. right? Like, so that's not like that with these other truths. These other truths are just individual things. If you pull out your belief of modern medicine, you can easily still believe everything else, but because it doesn't change the entire way you view the world. But this is literally the way that you view the world, So you have to go all the way back to the core of the way you're even going to look at any of those other subjects, and it's going to get shifted. And there's something that happens to you when it shifts. You now know, you have to question everything else, and you see things from a different angle. So I hope that makes sense. That's what I think it is. You won't really find many quote unquote flat earthers that fall for much of any of the other deceptions.
Yeah, it's almost like there's not a lot of conversation to be had. Like after you recognize that you've walked the same path, and we've come, many of us, to this terrain, through very different paths. And I know you know better than I do that there are folks who come to this truth, through religious dogma. There are folks who come through, a kind of like rebellion from the system. And then there are folks who come through the science and then through personal experience. So I wonder, if you're in a room, like let's say you're at a party or something with somebody who seems pretty chill, and they just genuinely ask you, like, how it is that you know that we live on a stationary plane, right? Like, have you distilled down, because I sometimes think about these things, like, have you distilled down like your favorite introductory proofs? Because I know, your YouTube channel and your work, I mean, you go into extraordinary scientific detail and have applied, as I mentioned, a lot of rigor to your explanations and your proofs. And you don't do much hand waving, right? If any at all. And a lot of folks, especially in these sort of burgeoning fields, there's a lot of hand waving. There's a lot of assumptions, and we just transfer the assumptions from there to there in an effort to like prove what is, instead of focusing on just debunking like what it is that we've been told, right? So if we were just to focus on like, hey, here's how I know that we're not on a spinning globe, like what are your favorite arguments? Because I know that you have many in your bag.
That's a good question, because I think it's changed over the years, to be honest. In the setting of a party, I will just go ahead and say this. Maybe it's beneficial to some people. I've learned the hard way even. I always flip it around. So you just flip it around. Like as soon as someone starts like acting weird, just be like, I don't think this is for you, bro. Or like, this is, don't make it weird. And then they want to know. And normally, if I'm going to introduce it to someone, because normally what happens is people ask me what I do. And if I'm going to tell them what I do, it's like, well, I make content, and I do a few other things, like content about what? If it's not the vibe, I'm like conspiracies, and they're like, oh, what conspiracies? I'm like, oh, you're going to think it's crazy. And like, oh, try me. At that point, you've like challenged their open-mindedness. And once you do say it, they kind of have trapped themselves into being somewhat receptive, right? So that's like a huge glitch in terms of the reaction. But if someone wanted the proof, I think you actually nailed it. You flip that around as well. So you just say like, well, I just looked into the idea that it's a spinning globe. Then I would start going into the things that show that's not the case. I honestly always bring up that we can see super, super far, because it's something that people can just go do. And if you actually do that in real life, it's wild. It's a wild experience to actually do that, to know that the mountain should be completely blocked. And you know for a fact you're looking at the actual mountain. You're just looking at it over bodies of water. Like we did it in Seattle. Seattle's very beautiful. It's what they've done to that place. But you have the beach and you have the mountains across the water. And so we were just, everywhere we went, no exceptions, you're seeing too far everywhere. I mean, like the entire United States, anytime I found a body of water, I prefer the coasts, so we kept along the coast a lot. And you could just see too far everywhere, which come to find out, the model now says like on average, you see 15 to 20% too far. Like on average, that's like the official globe claim now. So I think that's a big part of it. But this is the main thing I try to do to people, like in a real chill setting. Certainly if I've already built some rapport with them, is I talk them through the idea of just thinking about what they experience, because most people leap over that and they're just told what the conclusion is. So they didn't actually make up their own mind at all. So I just tell them like, well, just have you ever realized with the sun, I use the sun normally. So like we see the sun moving, and then we see it setting and then we see it rising. Well, like the globe model claim is that it's actually not moving. It's sitting still. It just looks like it's moving because during the sunset, you're falling backwards. You can't tell. And obviously, the other option is that, well, you're just standing still and the sun is moving. And then I use the sun and the moon. I say the sun and the moon appear to be the same size, and they claim that it's coincidentally 400 times bigger and 400 times further away. I think that's the best way, is to show people that, like, let's just like figure out if you even know what you believe, because you'd be surprised how many people that are really unfamiliar with the subject have know the like talking points to repeat. You know, like for somehow they won't even know the radius of the Earth. They won't know anything, but they will know what debunks flat Earth. You know, and they'll start talking about the boat disappears and stuff. And so obviously I can hang with any of them with that stuff, but that changes the whole vibe. It becomes this like intense thing where they're challenging me and I'm like trying not to pull the sword out, and it's weird, you know? So I try to like just keep it chill and just say like, oh, well, here's kind of what we experience. And have you ever thought about it? If you can get someone to just go in their normal day-to-day life and think about it, it's crazy. Like no one thinks about it. You know, when you see the sun, you see the moon, like think about what it is or what's really going on. Are they moving? So I know it was a long answer, but I also try to meet people where they are. I'll tell you a story real fast. So when I was on Timcast recently. And so when I was at the hotel, the girl at the front, she was same thing, asked me what I do, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm like, you know, it's just here for the show or whatever. And so she's pulling it out of me, but I very quickly, I'm like, conspiracy stuff. And she said, oh, you know, try me. And she starts telling me stuff she believes in. So she's like, I don't believe dinosaurs existed the way that they say they did. I don't believe we went to the moon. She starts listing them off. And I'm like, okay, well, I'll just tell you.
Right, girl.
Yeah, I'm just going to tell you the situation then, you know? So I try to meet people where they are. But yeah, I guess that's a long way of answering it. Like specific proofs. My favorite ones are simple ones, you know, like bodies of water. You can just look, bodies of water are flat. They reflect perfect mirror images, which if it was curving, it wouldn't do that. It would be distorted. We see hundreds of miles away, and very basic stuff.
So if you have a parent or an aging loved one who is struggling with balance, joint stiffness, or simply getting around, you may have wondered what you can possibly do to support them. And I believe that I have found the solution for our parents if you are in my generation. So Juvent's micro impact platform is one of the most effective and science-backed ways to improve mobility because it delivers precise, low magnitude vibrations through the soles of the feet that stimulate bone growth, improve circulation, and help maintain stability. There's no sweating, there's no strain. You literally just stand on it for 10 minutes a day. I speak to the Juvent CEO, Rush Simonson, in episode 114. And I learned that his own mother, who is in her 90s, went from bedbound to fully mobile with this simple daily routine. So if you want to be sure that somebody that you love stays healthy and independent, go to juvent.com/Kelly Brogan and use the code Kelly300 for $300 off at checkout. You can bring this incredible science-backed tool into their lives. And I think it's one of the most thoughtful and powerful investments that you can make in their well-being. So again, it's juvent.com/Kelly Brogan, and the code is Kelly300. You mentioned pulling out the sword, and that's why I love having this conversation with you, because I've seen you do it. I know that you know how to do it. And I know that that is like a weapon in your arsenal, right? So you could, you could pull out the sword and remain composed and just deliver the evidence, right? So because I know you've been, like I said, you're like the one we push out into the dance circle. I know you've been in many, many debate settings. And I wonder what are, like, tell us a little bit about that, right? Like, what are some of the topics that inevitably come up? What are the topics that you actually kind of enjoy debating on, if there are any? And what are some of the most like impenetrable tropes that you encounter? Because, right, like in the colloquial realm, yes, like there are parroted phrases. There's sort of like wouldn't we fall off the edge kind of a thing circulating around there. They're like little memes that have spread. But then even in the academic, arenas that you sort of dabble in, and find yourself in seats with these opponents, right? They also have their tropes that they pull out, probably semi-consciously. So yeah, I'd love to hear a little bit about, sort of the behind the scenes of your experience with that.
So I will say, I've talked to many, many, many PhDs off the record. The conversations are always way different off the record. And then none of them will agree to talk on the record because there's just too much to lose for them, but that part of it I actually do enjoy. If I'm able to talk to someone, and I obviously don't care about credentials at all. I dropped out of college. I'm like a big proponent of being an autodidactic and stuff like that. But it doesn't hurt if someone's defending the model and they actually know what it is or whatever. So I do enjoy that part. I love talking about like interferometry, Michelson-Morley, the specific implications, and now we know that what's called gravity is an emergent property of the oscillatory nature of the background and stuff like that. Because
this is like your rap album, by the way.
Well, it's just those are like the cutting edges of discovery right now. So I do like that because it's like we haven't figured that out as people yet, and it would change the world. And that part excites me. That's why I got so obsessed with this conversation, was like ether and magnetism and stuff. So I do like that. I actually don't. This is going to be funny. I don't particularly like the debates that I participate in. I feel like I'm very handicapped, and they're very disingenuous, and they're bad faith, and even with the credentials, they say stuff like, "Oh, I just disproved the ether," it's just a script. And it's like, that's just patently wrong and not true. And how do you have a PhD? It's so my experience is that this conversation is always flooded in bad faith, which is very disheartening. But I think it's a testament to kind of how difficult it is to deal with intellectually. You really can't rebut the arguments against the idea that we're moving, for example, right? There is no academic answer given to people. So they just tap out. So yeah, basically, I'm hoping to see this change soon. I think it's about to. I think with some of the appearances that are about to happen, the Antarctica trip that's about to happen, I think that we're going to shift over, and in a way, it'll get kind of diluted, and it'll have like a negative part, or it'll be kind of lame, But at the same time, I think that we'll finally open up the conversation. So I'm hoping to see that change. We'll see, because I'm not exaggerating when I say it doesn't matter who it is. It doesn't matter how much of an expert they are or anything. Every single person strawmans the position, misrepresents everything to do with the test, and it's wild. I guess that I will say it was the most eye-opening part for me. I was thinking I was going to run into a PhD and they were just going to get me in line real quick, right? That isn't even close to what happens. It's wild. It's like pretty crazy. So the tropes go from bottom to top. They're all misrepresentations, and people just got to look into it. That's all it is. Either you can get people to be like, you know what, fine, whatever, I'll look into it, or they're just not going to, and they're going to go with the scripts,
And you would think there would be, just sort of this bias that somebody already passionately believes in what we were taught in school, who goes to look into it. But it's a very common story that, folks went to disprove so-called flat Earth and they ended up flat earthers, right? Like, this is extremely common. I mean, it's not my story because I didn't have an opinion and I thought, who cares? Why does this even matter? And, why is David Wolf embarrassing himself in an interview with me bringing up how far he can see in Hawaii? Like, I just was in the camp that said, like, this is not relevant to life, and I have more important things to think about. But there's a lot of folks, right, who go in believing in the conventional programming and then somehow find themselves unable to, disprove the cardinal flat Earth assumptions. You've mentioned the ether a couple of times in this conversation, and I'm not really sure how penetrant that concept has been, for the average person listening. And so I want to just sort of give a bit of context around the relevance of that and why you've brought that up a couple of times and what that signifies, I guess, in terms of the nature of reality as something we're opening ourselves to perceiving differently.
Yeah, so it's basically the unseen realm in really simple terms. And if most people really think about it, they already know that exists. We have intuition, we have memories. I've known I was going to receive a text like a minute before I received the text, and I had not heard from the person in like 5 years. And Stuff like that happens quite a bit. I could feel that something's going to happen. My mom called me when I was in college, knew I got in trouble, at 2 a.m. So most people, if they really think about it, they know that there's something that we don't see that's kind of interconnected and interacting with us. But anyway, that's really what the ether is. It's this background. It's this unseen background. And based on the physical evidence, it operates like an ocean, like a body of water. And so light is basically the waves in water. And, this can obviously get very technical, and I won't do that. But like, technically, there's no such thing as a wave. And if you look at the ocean, you see the wave. Well, it's just the water in the ocean moving, right? And so what that implies is that everything comes from the unseen. And so it has major implications. Obviously, it refutes this notion of materialism and that there's nothing outside the material world. And obviously, modern academia has a huge bias against that, to the extent that they will go as far as to say stuff like, we know the Earth's 5 billion years old and all this crazy stuff to avoid anything spiritual or metaphysical. But the reason that this is so relevant is it actually got thrown out because of heliocentrism. And the tests showed, when they did interferometry tests, which are just lasers, basically, they can measure motion because they interfere in a certain way, showed the Earth wasn't moving. And then when we did a telescope test, they put water in a telescope. It was supposed to deflect a certain amount based on the Earth moving. It didn't do that. And we have many more tests. Michelson, Gale, Pearson, Dayton, Miller replicated it, on and on and on. So they had to come up with a way to keep the Earth moving through space. And so the first thing they had to do was get rid of the ether, because if there was this ocean, this unseen, like etheric realm that the Earth was moving through, then you would be able to detect it. And so they had to get rid of that. And then, they rolled out Einstein, and he just like warped the mind of people and said that space and time bend and warp and everything's an illusion and nothing's true and everything's relative. And it's all this crazy, basically evolved into moral relativism and crazy stuff. But so long story short, the ether was thrown out because of heliocentrism. Throughout all of history, all of mankind, people have known that there was an ether. It was called the quintessential element. It's the element that everything else comes from, and every single ancient civilization knew. And if you are somewhat of a truther, quote unquote, you've probably discovered that the ancient civilizations knew way more than we were told. They were way more advanced than we were led to believe. And they had a way better understanding of cosmology than we do. So basically what happens if you don't need to believe that the Earth is flying through this giant universe and it's this insignificant rock or whatever, that's called the Copernican principle, then immediately the ether gets put back on the table, because all the evidence ever says there is an ether. The only reason that anyone would ever remove the idea is because they have no choice if their other assumption doesn't work with it. And this has major implications for everything. That means we're swimming in an ocean of potential. And so all the energy comes from there. And so why would you not be able to tap into it, right? And people, they don't think of it like that because they don't think there's anything outside the material world. I think that the importance of ether can't be understated. I also would say I'm not going to claim to know exactly how it works, because I don't. I think that that's been the pursuit of man for all time, is to try to figure out exactly how it works. I don't know exactly how it works, but we know there's something there. It's basically an ocean. And I could basically intuitively imply something to you, and I don't need to actually speak to you. And I'm sure you may have experiences like that. I have communicated with people without verbally communicating with them multiple times. And obviously, there are some substances that people indulge in that also facilitate that experience. So, yeah, I think it's like the biggest thing ever. It unlocks the key to everything. It unlocks the key to understanding how majestic this place is, how it's intertwined with the metaphysical, what intuition is, what information is, what emotion is. It's pretty incredible that they've removed it successfully. And I think that they will fight like hell to keep people from discovering its true nature, because it immediately frees people in many ways. So yeah, there are some flat earthers that aren't always the happiest that I always talk about it, but I couldn't care less. It's what made me, it's weird to me that they are like that, but it's what made me, it's just sparked this like obsession with me, because I realized like, okay, the governments, they know it exists. They aren't letting us know. And so they are treating us kind of like children. Like we can't be trusted with the true nature of this place. And so I know that was a lot, but it's very fascinating and it has profound implications to say the least.
And I imagine, like so many of us, this has also led you down the rabbit holes of an alternative view of history, right? And the people who might have been here building these beautiful structures that were intended to interact, right, with the ether in ways that are not even in the realm of conception today. Is that something that also interests you to sort of look at that?
Yeah. So exactly how it works is I'm, undecided, but yeah, the sacred geometry found in all the buildings alone show that they understand the importance of frequency and vibration. And like I said, they all just straight up say that there's an ether. They all say that they manipulated the ether, that they utilized the ether. All the ancient teachings say that. And I don't know how far people have looked into that, but we've been completely lied to about history, and not just the Greeks, right? We've been lied to about America. And they're actually, like, side note, there are textbooks, even if you get pre-1910 in the US, you'll see even textbooks were saying that there was an advanced ancient civilization here prior to the Native Americans. So actually, it's a very recent deception. And then they founded these buildings, and 14-year-olds built them in 1 year in the winter without roads or whatever. So, and they all just happen to be buddies.
Right, with horse and buggy.
Yeah, with the Rockefellers. So
amazing. So I know that, and I'll be sure to point people in the direction of your library of information on the subject. And I know that you are still down to do these debates. You have some coming up, and I know that you have this like inner Rolodex of information that debunks conventional cosmology and also posits, right, some possibilities for the nature of this realm. But is there any subject matter, maybe it is related to what we've just been talking about, that you have since gravitated towards, that is alive for you, that you feel is like the next frontier of inquiry? Or do you feel it's important that we like marinate for some time still until we build more momentum in the cosmology realm before we move on into other arenas and topics?
Well, you kind of alluded to this. It's very difficult to top it because it includes so many things. I randomly run across things like World War II recently. I got very obsessed with World War II because I thought it had like huge implications it did have huge implications on everything that we live within right now. And to say the least, we were lied to about World War II. And if we weren't, it would have been the exception anyway, right? We were lied to about all the wars. But so I have moments where I get very interested in history. It's very hard to sift through history, though. So that was a recent one because we're seeing a lot of the same things that kind of led to World War II kind of happening right now. So I wanted to understand the socio dynamics, I guess, relevant to now. But I do think, and obviously I have a whole conspiracy about Trump, and I think that's pretty relevant. I kind of predicted that Trump would team up with Elon in 2020, and everyone thought I was crazy. And I said, no, Trump's the hero. He's been cast in the play. He's going to come save the day. And then he's going to update the whole system. And they're going to kind of push towards a technocratic state, but it's going to be under the guise of a golden age. And then Trump wins and says, we're about to enter a golden age and stuff. And so that's one thing I think I find very interesting is how there's this giant meta kind of plan that's being orchestrated. And if the people find out, we would win. It's very funny. People get scared. I think they're scared of us. So those are a couple of things right now, but it's really hard to conceive of anything that can top cosmology because it just includes everything, including the ether. And if just the ether alone it's the building block for literally everything, so it gives you tons of power individually and stuff like that. So I don't know. I would be hard pressed. I do think germ theory was a big one for me. Obviously, that changes a lot of the way you view the world. Health, germ theory, all of that can't be understated. That's right up there with cosmology, in my opinion. But outside of those two, it's going to be pretty hard. I can't even conceive of a theoretical one. So history, cosmology, and health are kind of the trinity, right? The trifecta. So I think we have plenty of work to do just focusing on those. Honestly, I'm open to a new one. If anyone knows of something, please let me know because I'm trying to trying to top the rush, you know?
So CMOS has become quite a thing lately, and I love myself a therapeutic food over a supplement any day. But there's CMOS, and then there's my fave, Samadhi CMOS. So most people don't realize that mineral deficiency is one of the biggest drivers of imbalance, whether you're experiencing that as fatigue or weight gain or cravings. So unless you're growing your own food, it doesn't contain, almost by definition, the spectrum of minerals that our ancestors enjoyed. So that's why I am excited about Samadhi CMOS. It's not your typical store-bought, rope-farmed CMOS. It's 100% wild, and it's harvested by Caribbean divers from super clean waters, ensuring purity and also ecological respect. It contains over 90 bioavailable minerals and vitamins, many of which are hard to get even in a very high quality diet. Plus, it's a natural collagen booster and prebiotic, making it an effortless way to support the gut, your skin, and your overall vitality. So I take 1 to 2 tablespoons a day in warm water that I also put a little bit of sea salt in and lime or lemon. Key lime is actually my favorite. And I noticed a shift in my digestion after just a week. The best part is that it tastes like nothing, which makes it super easy to add to your routine. So if you want to experience the benefits yourself, Samadhi is offering 10% off with the code Kelly10. Check out the link in show notes and enjoy. Yeah. I mean, I guess what has become really interesting to observe, and this is kind of cooking for me, and I don't have conclusions, but I have some theories, are the sort of just the fields of consciousness that we can become entrapped by. And you alluded to one that I've observed, which is, I call it like a diathesis, but it's basically this collection of beliefs that run together and that are adjacent, to the conventional narrative, but consider themselves renegade, like consider themselves alternative. So it includes beliefs like Lyme disease, parasites, mold, right? Like obsessions with these as ideologies of like all that is bothering people in the world. These folks often still do believe in germ theory, right? They also happen to be like anti-pharma and anti-vax. And they also are interested in electing the hero, right? So it's like somehow I know tons of folks like this, and they are all globers. So sometimes they're glober New Agers, right? Where they believe in like, I don't know what people call like galactic council stuff or whatever, and alien stuff and whatever. And I'm not, here to prove, disprove. It's not interesting to me to like enter into like nitpicking people's belief systems. What interests me is like, what is the common thread through all of those things? And why do they tend to run together in this like belief field? It's like a collection that you get to buy, of all the wares in the cabinet. And it includes these specific beliefs that, again, through my very biased lens, it looks like victim consciousness, right? It looks like pointing to the sinner out there, the savior out there, the invisible, sort of source of badness that's been projected outside. But then there's also the idealization, right? Like, let's put the hero in office. That can happen, and the good daddy will come and save the day kind of dynamics. And somehow those hinge upon a belief in the classical, if that's the right word, solar system, right? Like they all seem to go together. And I find it really interesting to unpack, right? So like, what is the complementary field that we're here discussing? Like what are the fundamental elements of that? I don't know. Like we have a group of colleagues and we all seem to see the world very similarly. And like, what is it? What is it that defines, the way that the lens through which we perceive? And this meta discussion is really interesting to me, and it feels new. Like it feels like kind of like it's bubbling in its development, I guess.
So that sounds that's very interesting. You made me think, because like it does seem like in all those scenarios, it's almost like though you can go a certain depth prior to self-accountability or anything like that, right? So as long as you can like kind of justify whatever deception it is externally, it's pretty interesting. It makes me think, because what you were making me think, it does seem to totally be something like that, because I can tell when someone's going to end up being like where we are. Like I can tell after talking to them, I'm like, oh, you're a flat earther. You just don't know. And I bet like 1,000 almost. You can just tell because they don't have this ego invested into the lie for whatever reason, and you can just kind of tell when someone is willing to really check all of their preconceived notions. And so I wonder what that is. I wonder if there's it's about like an internal decision, which, we could never know. It's internal to actually just accept the truth for whatever it is, as simple as it is. That is, right? Like, it's like an eternal decision that is like, whatever the truth is, I want to know. And maybe there's just a good amount of people that don't truly make that internal decision, It's like, whatever the truth is, I want to know, as long as, it's still pretty comfortable. I wonder if there is like an etheric component to it.
Yeah, because it seems like a field. I'm also very interested in, what this journey of inquiry is like for women versus for men, because I do find that there are emotional initiation points, I would say, that are different. And that's why I've noted, especially in the cosmology topic, that there's like a whole lot of men with their panties in a bunch about this subject. And I really don't encounter a lot of women, not that they aren't out there, who feel as confronted by what it is to consider, the possibility that what we learned in school, along with everything else, was highly curated, managed, and prescribed, for a specific effect. This isn't like, it shouldn't be that confronting, especially to folks who are already questioning other things. And it is. I mean, it really seems to be. So I think of it often like I watch the emotional reaction, and it almost has that stress physiology that trauma bears, like it's related to mommy daddy stuff. And that's not to diminish, it's real. And so, right, like what I sense in you and the way you interact with this information in the public arena is that you respect when somebody's ready, and not that it's necessarily something that everybody's eventually ready for, or not, maybe even that it's like better if they're ready than not. Like, it just sort of is what it is. And if they have questions, you're here to answer it, and you know how to interact with the information and wield it with a degree of mastery that I think is really exemplary. So I'm super grateful that you're out there answering questions on our behalf. And keep it up, man. I mean, keep up the good work.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I will say the one part that switches away from that is just, that does trigger me, is the children, because it's like, now that I have like daughters, like I could tell Aaliyah anything, and so I really don't like forcing these beliefs that have long-term, pretty serious implications on the way they view the world onto children. That's the part that kind of, it crosses the line a bit for me. I could at least tell them kind of the full story, or encourage them to think about it themselves and stuff like that. But yeah, when it comes to everyone else, it's just, don't make it weird, bro. Like, I don't care if you believe in.
But that's why, as someone with 2 teenage daughters who's very invested, obviously, in this subject matter, that's why I've taken an interest in like who's representing this in a way that is appealing, right? Because, like I could scare my daughters out of having a medicalized childbirth, right? Like later in their lives. And I can do so pretty well, like pretty handily. Like I can come up with all sorts of material and scientific reasons why having a hospital-based birth would be a really bad thing for them, right? But what am I doing there? I am controlling their behavior through fear. I mean, it's the same playbook, right? Or I could invite them into like the extraordinary nature of a free or home birth experience and like make it irresistible, right? It's just marketing in the end, but it's also psychological and emotional attunement, right? So like if we come at them assuming that they can't figure it out on their own, which by the way, they can, like, especially in their generation, like they're exposed to many, many different perspectives. And some of this, like for them, it's like, okay, fine. Like it's the barriers aren't there. I find like there's just a lot less programming than we've been exposed to. And that's I don't know what to make of that, because you would think there's more because of the nature of the cyborg reality that we're all living in right now. But for whatever reason, when you don't interfere with your kids' emotional apparatus and their own embodiment, they can feel the truth, right? And it's almost obvious to them. And so we're not assuming that they can't find the truth on their own. And then I think it's more about the sociocultural aspects, right? Because like, what is the cost to them of aligning with that truth? Does it mean that they have to wear a fucking tinfoil hat and like be ostracized and they don't get to participate in, this, that, and the other that the rest of society is doing? So it becomes about like social mechanisms, I think, ultimately. And that's why, I'm sure you're doing a good job of making it cool for your kids.
Yeah. I mean, Aaliyah's only 2, so we're pretty far away, but I totally agree. A lot of people are very like, kind of negative about the younger generation. I totally don't feel that way at all. I agree with what you're saying. They're actually like crushing in lots of ways. They're very quick to see through propaganda once it's shown to them, and it doesn't, like, they're not surprised by anything. If you tell like someone that's older about one of these major truths, it's just going to like ruin their whole week or whatever if they see it. But not the younger generation. It's just like on to the next. It's totally cool. You just don't want it to be so overwhelming, and then it starts being lame. It's like, even if you're right, I don't care, like you're being lame. Yeah.
Totally. Yeah. Over the past years, I have this like very cool, I wish I could remember and attribute to who made it, but very cool, like sort of like a diorama light thing or whatever. It's like a flat earth depiction. And it's just this cool, like physical thing that I have just like on a coffee table in the house. And then I commissioned this like very beautiful piece of art from Lindsay Ridgway, and who I've had on the podcast. And it's like a depiction of this cosmology, and it's just on the wall, right? So it's like, I've had those sort of around, and it's part of how I just sort of like sprinkle the fairy dust of like, the invitation, to this way of perceiving. And it's almost like the countermanding of the globe on the teacher's desk kind of a thing that I've, attempted at home, because the fire hose method, at least with my kids, was absolutely not the vibe. It's not the way. And they were rightly allergic to my insisting that they adopt my hard-won perspectives. It's just not the way. So I'm very interested in different models of transmitting this info. So yeah, I hear you.
Yeah. I'll say one more thing you made me think of, because I know we've been in for a while, but you brought up the difference in the men and the women. And this is another part of it that's totally relevant. It's so toxic. Like, this conversation gets so toxic and just over the top that women are just kind of disinterested in truly engaging in it. And really, the truth of cosmology needs more women to be involved and even seen involved. And I am interested in why. I'm curious as to why there's such a huge difference. But I think one is just a simple way. It's like, it's just, the men are just so intense and kind of over the top about it that they just don't want to participate. They don't want to be involved. And then as to the other layer of why they don't have the crazy reaction to it, I think that probably has a lot to do with like ego, and then the men kind of internalize the beliefs a bit more, maybe. I don't know. It's pretty interesting to think about. But yeah, like, I think you nailed it. The number one way, and this is why I'm so confused why people don't see what I do, even if cosmology is my number one goal to wake people up to, talking about other stuff is super important. You just being normal and having like a likable vibe and resonating with people and knowing other things, and then they just find out later what you think about cosmology, is way more effective, to the point where even in my personal life with my family and stuff, now that's how it is. I don't bring up anything. I make it feel like they're like end up wanting me so bad to talk about it, and I'm just like, I guess if you start making it weird, I'm not going to want to participate, It's totally the move. It's totally the move. So yeah, just like letting people come to it, and what do they know? What do they know that makes them so comfortable? And no way, Kelly doesn't believe in the globe. That's way better than sit down about the MK Ultra U in reverse. So
Yeah, exactly. I was just talking to somebody about how I've had this experience in the feminine embodiment world. Is a lot of the sort of big teachers out there are, how do I want to put this? They seem to, even though they believe in the power of a woman's embodiment and, the reclamation of sensuality and the channeling of like feminine eros as being a portal to the divine and all this stuff. Like they often were the ones putting on a mask, during those years and having pronouns on their Zoom account and all of the sort of, victim oriented programming, I would say. And so a lot of times, like I'll end up in, I don't know, social settings with these kinds of gals and they, and teachers and they like me, right? And so we'll have dinner together and we'll talk about guys together and whatever. And then they'll come upon my beliefs later. And somehow it works out because if I led with a lot of these things, it would be super confronting. And it's a misrepresentation also of what matters to me to imagine that there's like some belief related litmus that is the only way I'm going to interact with somebody. I was like that. I have been that person where it was like tribal, right? Like you're in or you're out. Do you get it or do you not? I mean, especially around germ theory stuff. And these days I'm more interested in this version of the game, right? Where I just, am me. I go about in the world. I find ways to like relate and connect to people that are seemingly not on the page and then just sort of see, it feels more fun. To see what happens and what kinds of nonlinear like ripple effects can manifest, right? Like through that kind of approach. And I know you're up to that and I value it. In addition to the direct approach of, getting up there with your index cards and going through the math. So I appreciate you, Austin. And we'll make sure that people know where to learn more from you and follow along in your adventures. Yeah, serious adventures coming out.